Chapter 13. His first day at Hogwarts, Draco is awake slightly before dawn. It's a habit that's been built into him since he was a child, so he's not surprised to wake up in the darkness before everyone else. Seeing no point in trying to go back to sleep, Draco slips out of bed and decides to go out for a quick run before breakfast. He changes into his usual training attire, a sleeveless long tunic with loose-fitting trousers underneath. It was plain save for a few runes which his father had taught him how to add years ago to protect his fair skin from the sun. Draco remembers when a long day of sparring in Asgard with his Aunt Sif had left him with the skin tones of a beet. It feels incomplete without arm bracers or hand wraps, but he's not going to be practicing archery or hitting a training post. He frowns and thinks that he'll have to figure out how to keep up his training. Draco hates the thought of disappointing his Uncle Thor with poor combat skills. It will be less than 4 months until they return to Asgard during the Hogwarts winter break, but that is enough time for his reflexes to suffer from lack of training. Once he steps outside the castle, he scans the landscape. He recalls the headmaster's prohibition against going into the forest, and with a name like the Forbidden Forest, how could one forget, really? So he won't be heading that way. Draco catches sight of whooped goalposts in the distance and decides that a quick jog to and from the Quidditch pitch would do fine. Even at a fairly casual pace, he is able to complete his planned route much faster than he had thought he would. Tomorrow, Draco thinks he'll run it a bit swifter and add a lap or two around the pitch, maybe even practice some forms by the lake. When he returns to his dormitory, it's been less than an hour since he left. Harry is still asleep in bed asleep, while Zabini is awake and looking out of the window into the murky green waters outside. "Good morning, Zabini," Draco greets. "What in Merlin's name are you wearing?" is Zabini's reply. "Don't you know what Scandinavian wizarding robes look like?" Draco answers. Zabini's scowl makes him snort in amusement. "Those look nothing like Scandinavian wizarding robes, more like Scandinavian wizarding pyjamas. You'd better not lose us any house points because you like playing dress-up," Zabini grumbles. Hogwarts dress code. Students will wear their Hogwarts robes beginning with breakfast through the final meal of the day, whether or not a student has completed all class obligations. Other attire may be worn at weekends and during free time, Draco recites. "It's not breakfast yet," he adds smugly. Zabini continues his unimpressed stare. "Relax, Zabini. Just a bit of light training before the day starts," Draco comments before nudging Harry awake and then heading to the showers. It had been surprising and a little startling to find Odinson's bed empty in the morning. Blaze's first thought was to wonder if his roommate had been taken away against his will. No doubt, an association with Odinson's moniker as the boy who was kidnapped. He dismissed the silly notion almost as soon as it came to mind, recalling that Hogwarts is as heavily warded as the Ministry of Magic. Everyone in pureblood society knew the scandal of Lucius Malfoy mysteriously losing his heir to a Scandinavian wizard named Odinson. The events surrounding Draco's disappearance had fascinated him as a child. Blaze's favorite theory back then was that Draco had been taken by Odinson because of a strong resemblance to a son who had been killed by wild muggles. Looking back, he almost cringed at his younger self's naive daydreaming. Blaze had often wondered what it would feel like to be so wanted, to have someone go so far just because they wanted him in their life that much. Blaze's father had died when he was a baby, and his mother had married twice since, but neither of them ever wanted to adopt him as their son. His mother's eighth husband had been nice, and even threw a quaffle around with him once, until his mother became silently enraged at not being the center of attention. His stepfather had stopped the game abruptly, looking nervously over at her before apologizing quickly and mumbling something about how they should make sure she was happy. That man was dead now, so maybe he wasn't so good at it. Then again, Mother was always impossible to please, Blaze thinks, and then recalls their trip to Diagon Alley in the summer. Darling, don't be ridiculous. The color doesn't suit your skin tone at all. Put that back, his mother had chided. Blaze obeyed without question. His mother is always generous with her gifts, but she only ever purchased the things that met with her approval. Blaze reminded himself that he shouldn't complain because Mother always picked out the best for him. She took pride in her notoriety as one of the most beautiful witches in the world and was meticulous about appearance. Everything down to the smallest adornment was deliberately composed to add to her allure. It was only natural that her son should emulate that perfection. Mother simply wanted him to have the best advantage possible. Still, Blaze often wondered if the day would ever come when his opinions would actually count for something. Have you memorized all the charms to keep your appearance up while at Hogwarts? Remember that you need to cast the charm for your hair every 3 weeks or else it will lose its shape and become scraggly. Mother reminded him for the 5th time that day. Yes, Mother, Blaze said dutifully. It was automatic to agree with her. He knew that disagreement would only lead to unpleasantness. Mother always got her way. Remember, darling, the way you present yourself is of utmost importance. You can only make a first impression once. You do understand, don't you, darling? I understand, Mother. His responses have been perfunctory since he was 6 years old. Blaze still remembers the night when was locked in his room and not given dinner when he tried to insist that he wanted to make his hair like the Roman sculptures he had seen at the museum. He had cried all night. The next day, Mother had only let him out once he apologized and said that the way she styled his hair was the best. It was always better not to argue with Mother. And I'll be sure to read the first chapters of my books before the term starts so as to make a good impression on my professors. Blaze added in an attempt to gain some measure of goodwill for his dedication to putting his best foot forward. Of course, Mother didn't acknowledge it. She continued on as if he hadn't spoken a word. The cut of your school robes is atrocious. I need to have them altered by a true professional who knows what they are doing, she complained. Blaze reminded himself that it was stupid to be disappointed by something so insignificant. Mother doesn't mean to ignore him. She simply has a million thoughts in her head, and finding fault with the world around her is her special ability. Mother hears some child exclaim in a common accent, and she looks as if she's been forced to smell rotting fish. Honestly. As if it isn't enough that we need to come into such a common shop to purchase your school robes. I can only imagine what Madame Malkin has done to win such exclusivity. Blaze had looked away to roll his eyes. Madame Malkin's was more accessible, and Twilfit and Taddings did well enough without needing to carry school robes in their inventory. He couldn't have said any of that out loud to Mother, of course. Challenging or contradicting her opinions never led to anything good. Once we're done here, we should get Cersei. His mother stopped speaking altogether. Taken aback and curious to know what had derailed Mother's thoughts so thoroughly, Blaze followed her line of sight to see that she was looking at a tall, dark-haired wizard wearing unusual clothing. Mother was wearing a smile that reminded him of the painting that sat in their foyer of a tiger, stalking its prey. The man exited the shop, followed by two boys, one with white blonde hair wearing similarly strange clothing, and another boy with glasses wearing clothes so atrocious they could only be Muggle. I do believe that was the reclusive Lord Odinson. It appears that the lost heir will be arriving at Hogwarts this term. How interesting. Blaze had never imagined that the boy who was kidnapped might ever go to Hogwarts. It seemed obvious that the missing boy would wind up at Durmstrang, if anything, since he was taken by a Scandinavian wizard. When he was younger, Blaze had wondered if trying to go to Durmstrang on the chance that he could get to ask questions about what happened was worth it. But now, if the Malfoy-turned-Odinson heir was going to Hogwarts, maybe, he could finally learn the truth about what happened. Before Blaze could gather any more of his thoughts on this surprising turn of events, his mother grabbed his shoulder roughly. Blaze, pay attention, she snapped, turning to him with excitement in her hazel-tinted eyes. You will befriend Draco Odinson at Hogwarts. You will find out everything you can about his family, and most important of all, you will get an introduction for me to meet his reclusive guardian. Do you understand? Yes, mother. That's my sweet boy. Of course you do, darling, she cooed and patted his shoulder affectionately. Now, come along. He had smiled, thinking that he would have tried to get close to Odinson even if his mother hadn't directed him to. Blaze was used to performing a role to suit the expectations of others, and he had thought that the role of lost friend was the best one to get close to the boy who was kidnapped. Technically, he hadn't even been lying about having met Odinson before he disappeared. Blaze is mostly certain that they must have crossed paths at some point. And when he was a child, Blaze imagined countless times what it would have been like in the aftermath of the kidnapping if they had actually been friends. He thought that he could play it well, but Blaze's nostalgic fantasy caused him to make an unfortunate miscalculation last night. When Odinson saw through his pretense, Blaze had fallen back on offering himself as an ally the way his mother had suggested before he had boarded the train. He made it clear that he wanted information. And in response, rather than state what he'd want in return like a civilized wizard, Odinson had taunted him with the idea of friendship, as if Blaze would fall for that. No Slytherin would offer such a thing of value so easily to someone they just met without first having proven a mutually beneficial alliance could be had. The secretive conversation that Odinson and Potter had made it obvious that he wasn't trusted. The only thing that Blaze was able to learn was that garden gnomes were the reason for something. When a lively Odinson walks into the room in clothes that look more suited to sleeping than wandering the castle at the break of dawn, he decides that an annoyed roommate role is the best way to ask about the strange attire without seeming too interested. Blaze feels his resolve strengthen. He'll solve the odd puzzle that is Draco Odinson no matter what. The potions master gives his usual introduction the first day of class. There will be no foolish wand waving or silly incantations in this class. As such, I don't expect many of you to appreciate the subtle science of potion making. However, for those of you who possess the predisposition, I can teach you how to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. I can tell you how to brew glory, bottle fame, and even put a stopper in death. Severus passes over those first years with the usual anxious reactions. He focuses on the students who don't follow the norm. A Gryffindor girl who looks like she is eagerly waiting for a chance to speak, a very bored-looking Draco, and the Potter boy who listens with rapt attention. It is uncomfortable to be the focus of fascinated eyes that look so much like Lily's. The familiar guilt of his past mistakes bubbles up in his gut uncomfortably. And it doesn't matter that the boy has been sorted into his house. Severus reflexively reaches for his only defense. "Mr. Potter, our new celebrity," he drawls. The boy's eyes falter and he looks uncomfortable. Severus takes satisfaction in it, even while that distant part of his mind is chastising him for treating one of his own Slytherins so harshly. "Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormhood?" The first class is an introduction to all the tools used in potion making to ensure that these children do not damage any equipment, but the words spill out from Severus' mouth without any thought for the lesson plan for the day. Potter begins and then gulps nervously. Severus curses his inability to control his reaction to Lily's child. His frown deepens as he becomes painfully aware that he's facilitated a show of weakness within his house, and now he'll have to take house points. In his peripheral vision, Severus sees a hand shoot up. The bushy-haired Gryffindor girl, no doubt. Draco also makes a sudden movement to sit up straighter, likely preparing to be called upon next. But Severus keeps his gaze fixed on Potter and formulates the best response to minimize the damage of his inability to control his reaction for when the boy admits his lack of knowledge. These are basic facts which you will all learn this term, and I expect you to all to be prepared to answer such questions with ease by the time of your examinations. Severus thinks he can probably avoid taking points if he frames it that way. Those are the ingredients for draught of living death, sir, Potter answers. And it's so surprising that Potter was able to answer the question that his perfect mask of indifference almost slips. His eyes narrow slightly, and he can't help but ask another question. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? Potter's eyes brighten, and he answers immediately this time. In the belly of a goat, sir. The confidence with which the boy responds prompts Severus to ask a third question. Why exactly he keeps pushing, he's not quite sure. Perhaps he hopes that the boy has taken more after Lily than his unfortunate resemblance suggests. What is the difference, Potter, between monkshood and wolfsbane? They are different names for aconite, sir. Indeed. 10 points to Slytherin. Severus looks at Potter thoughtfully for a moment before he turns his glare upon the rest of the class. Well, why aren't you all copying that down? He growls impatiently. The entire class is suddenly scrambling for their quills to write down the information save for Draco. The blond boy's bored expression is gone, and he's looking at Severus very peculiarly. He feels a pang of loss at not having been able to know his godson these last few years, and the bitter reminder of his failure to honor his promise to Narcissa before he promptly shoves the feeling away. The rest of the first lesson passes in routine fashion as Severus lectures about the different types of cauldrons and vials. Draco didn't think it was possible, but their second class of the day, herbology, is even more of a bore than potions. Harry is far too excited about the subject, pointing out various plants to Draco with a happy grin before Professor Sprout arrives. Even Yer is having a better time, happy to be out in the warmth of the greenhouses. They have herbology with the Hufflepuffs, and there is a very noticeable divide wherein those in black and yellow scarves are on one side of the greenhouse, while the ones in green and silver occupy the other side. After a childhood filled with imagining Aunt Sif as best friends with Helga Hufflepuff, it's a bit disenchanting to see the Hufflepuffs acting so timidly. Draco also hates how warily they seem to be looking at their Slytherin classmates. Gemma had made light of Slytherin's stigma for subscribing to the dark arts and suggested that it could be fun to hint at having a whole library full of curses. Draco, however, found himself troubled by her flippant attitude. He felt that it was wrong to encourage that perception. Draco resented the implication that Slytherins were somehow suspect because the dark arts were so strongly associated with his house. Draco was a warrior of Asgard, a protector of the realms. To be viewed as a villain, simply because Midgard had such backward thinking about the nature of magic, was infuriating. Certainly, there were magics that were called unpredictable and often came with a price too heavy to pay. Manipulating the metaphysical essence of a being was delicate and could too easily damage soul and spirit. Using blood as a catalyst was complex and could have dire consequences. Magic could require all kinds of sacrifice on a spectrum of pain and death and magic. But in the other realms, these were not considered inherently evil as they were in Midgard, and the prohibitions against their use had more to do with intent rather than its nature. For instance, a spell using blood to create a bond between those in love was acceptable, but one used to enslave was prohibited. It was this nuance that the Wizarding Society of Midgard did not understand. The magical mortals were still early in their discovery and development of magic. It made sense for certain distasteful practices to fall out of favor as Midgardian civilization progressed. But defining dark magic as magic used to cause harm, control, or death to the victim missed the point. Practically all magic had the potential to be used in that way. By its own definition, everyone practiced dark magic in some form. The same severing charm which cuts hair harmlessly could be used to murder. A levitation charm used to help an elderly person up the stairs could be used to cause a person to fall from a great height. Ultimately, the dark arts simply referred to a vague grouping of magics in Midgardian wizarding society, which essentially encompassed whatever the Midgardian magical mortals felt was morally objectionable at the time. The ebbs and flow of culture determined the acceptable boundaries from decade to decade. Additionally, regional differences made some forms of magic perfectly acceptable in one area of the world and unthinkable in another. His father had taught him that magic was shaped by the intent of the one who wields it, a neutral force that could be used to heal or kill and create or destroy. It was like a living element whose power had to be respected and whose power over same carried a grave responsibility. Magic was neither good nor evil. It is what people choose to do with it which ultimately defines its character. Draco's stomach suddenly growls, and he wishes that the class was over already so they could go have their lunch. He didn't get to eat as much breakfast as he'd liked, because he got distracted by the delivery of New York Ghost End, caught up reading an article profiling the top Skyball seekers. He silently bemoans that the greenhouses are located on the opposite side of the castle. By the time they navigate their way to the Great Hall, they will likely only a little over half an hour to eat in order to ensure that they leave in time to find their history of magic classroom. That just isn't enough time to eat a proper meal. And then it's another 6 hours until dinner, and by that time Draco will be absolutely ravenous. Last night's dinner, while far from anything resembling a feast, he's trying his best not to remain bitter about that disappointment, wasn't terrible at least. He thinks longingly about the sights and sounds and smells of a real feast in Asgard. He imagines the taste and texture of his favorite dish, and his mouth waters. I'm so hungry I could eat an entire Eichthionir. At Harry's confused look, Draco remembers that they don't have Eichthionir on Midgard and thinks of the closest resemblance to it found in this realm. I meant an entire deer. Harry looks at Draco and then says with all seriousness, I really think you could, actually. Draco laughs and bumps shoulders with his friend lightly. While he loved his morning classes, Harry isn't as interested in the afternoon ones. Harry is pretty sure that he fell asleep at some point during History of Magic. Even with Draco frequently interrupting the droning of the ghostly Professor Binns to ask questions about all manner of things, it felt like the longest hour of his life. Harry had always hated the subject of history. He thought it had to be the most uninteresting, impractical, userless subject there was. During his month at the Odinson estate, he made himself pay attention to Loki's lessons about the history of the wizarding world, because he figured he ought to know at least some major events. But learning all the details, Harry's eyes unfocus against his will any time he tries to read his History of Magic textbook. Their final class of the day is Defense Against the Dark Arts. And though Dada sounded like an exciting topic, Professor Quirrell is a bit of a quack and can't finish any of his stories. Plus, he smells funny. Even Yer thinks so. Draco is snickering at the spell that Professor Quirrell is lecturing them on and pokes Harry, whispering, That's the dumbest incantation I've ever heard. Harry doesn't look at Draco, attempting to maintain the pretense that he's paying attention to class as he queries back quietly, What's wrong with it? It's quite silly, isn't it? Draco muffles more giggles behind his hand. I mean, what kind of spell is lamp? Light would make more sense. He turns his head in surprise. Draco, Harry begins with some confusion. Professor Quirrell didn't say lamp. He said lumos. Draco snorts and his smile doesn't falter. You just said lamp twice. No, I said. All right, everyone. P, please, practice the lumos charm now. Professor Quirrell instructs. Draco looks thoroughly amused as their classmates start practicing the lumos charm. Harry is fairly acquainted with his best friend's quirky sense of humor, but he has a feeling that something is off and has a hunch of what it might be. He squeezes Draco's arm to get his attention. Do you hear everyone saying lamp or lumos? Harry probes. Draco rolls his eyes. Lamp or lamp? That's really not a very good joke, Harry. All speak, Harry exclaims, and that gets Draco's attention. The charm is in Latin, and you can't hear the Latin because of Allspeak. Draco's eyes widen in understanding, and he flips through his textbook. He finds the page describing the Lumos charm. Harry remembers Draco saying that Allspeak doesn't work with written words. His watches as Draco stares at the page for a long moment and then says, Lamp. Harry winces. Draco looks up and his face falls. Please don't tell me, you said. Lamp again, Draco, not Lumos. Draco's head thumps against his desk. As the darkness and light compete in the skies of Asgard at the end of a long day, Loki wanders past the palace gates for much-needed solitude. His recent arrival had coincided with his golden brother's return from subduing a bold band of marauders, attempting to plunder a remote town in Vanaheim. They likely thought the village too small to catch the notice of Asgard, and certainly not significant enough to merit the attention of the mighty Thor. Such assumptions were pure stupidity. The smallest hint of rumor was enough for Thor come running if it offered the possibility to wield Mjolnir in battle. And even if it was only a minor skirmish at best, Thor demanded that his victory against such rabble be celebrated with feasting. Without his little dragon's presence, such things are so much less tolerable. In the time since Draco has come to live with him, the times apart from the child of his magic have been rare. Whenever he had to leave the boy in Frigga's care, while Odin tasked him with some diplomatic assignment, Loki would appear to Draco in his dreams. It became habit to check on Draco during these nights away from each other. The boy's imagination was vast, and it was always amusing to walk into a dream wherein Draco was single-handedly defending Asgard from a horde of Eldritnar or whatnot. But less than a day in Asgard had passed for him, and Loki is unsure of how much time has passed for Draco on Midgard at present. He thinks probably not too much time, but the time differentials between realms were constantly shifting in a pattern only discernible by Heimdall. He has never been friends with the taciturn guardian of the Bifrost. They've hardly exchanged conversation. But tonight he's walked the entire length of the Rainbow Bridge while lost in thought and reaches the end of it. Without really intending to, he is in the presence of the one other person not in attendance at the feast. He hadn't planned on approaching the golden-armored Heimdall tonight, but now that he's found himself here, how fares Draco? Loki asks, knowing that Heimdall's attention is routinely drawn to Draco's activities whenever his little dragon calls out to the gatekeeper in excitement. The littlest prince is well. Discontented at times, but well. Heimdall reports formally, then turns his head slightly towards Loki. The first night, he muttered to me some disappointment about what passes for a feast on Midgard. There is a small upturn of his mouth that could almost be the shadow of a smile. Loki lets out a startled laugh. Apparently, Draco also likes to make spontaneous complaints to Heimdall as well. Ah, well, nothing too heinous for him to endure then. He blinks as his mind repeats in full what Heimdall has said, and then adds, "You said, the first night. Nearly a week has passed in Midgard. The little prince misses his father and wishes for his counsel." Heimdall informs Loki. He did not anticipate that so much time could have already passed for Draco. More often than not, the time differential between realms flows such that more time passes on Asgard, not less. The concern he was feeling must have shown on his face because Heimdall added, "The branches of Yggdrasil rarely sway in this manner, but these times are as fleeting as the wind." "Thank you, Heimdall. It eases my worry to know that you watch over him so. I shall check in on him this evening." I am eager to hear all about Draco's first week at his new place of learning, Loki says before he goes back to his rooms and focuses on traversing and projecting his presence across the realms and into Draco's dream. Chapter 14. Previously, Allspeak, Harry says seriously, and that gets Draco's attention. The incantation is in Latin, and you can't hear the Latin because of Allspeak. He voices his suspicions. Draco's eyes widen in understanding, and he flips through his textbook. He finds the page describing the Lumos charm. Harry remembers Draco saying that Allspeak doesn't work with written words. His watches as Draco stares at the page for a long moment and then says, "Lamp." Harry winces. Draco looks up and his face falls. "Please don't tell me, you said. Lamp again, Draco, not Lumos." Draco's head thumps against his desk. When class is dismissed, Draco mumbles, "I'll meet you later at dinner." "I have to go, I need to," and then rushes out without another word, while Harry is still gathering his things. He's never seen Draco look so out of sorts. Harry tries to follow, hoping there might be something he can do to help, but he doubles over in pain before reaching the hallway. His scar is burning again. It's even more intense than the short burst of pain he experienced during the welcome feast. He reaches up to massage his forehead, hoping that it will provide some relief. "Easy there, Potter," a smooth and familiar voice says before a hand takes hold of his elbow and tugs him up and out of the classroom. After a few steps down the hall, the pain starts to recede, and he straightens. Harry turns his head to see who helped him out of the classroom. "Zabini," Harry asks, because the world is just starting to come back into focus. "Do you need to see the Mediwitch?" inquires the still slightly blurry figure who Harry decides is definitely Zabini. "I'm fine," he replies and adjusts his glasses. "Did you see where Draco went?" "No." The taller boy steps back and takes note of Harry's appearance. "You don't seem well, Potter. Best we head back to the common room. It puts us all at a disadvantage if any one of us shows weakness." He nods in agreement, remembering the admonitions given by their head of houses when they first arrived in Slytherin House. Despite Zabini's failed subterfuge the night before, Harry surprisingly doesn't feel too guarded. He falls into step with his fellow Slytherin without comment. Throughout his first day at Hogwarts, there's been a strong sense of solidarity amongst the Slytherins. While he had expected Draco's defensiveness and pretended not to notice, Harry didn't expect to see some of the others in his house to be leveling icy glares of their own when whispers had followed Harry in the halls. The implicit support was an unexpected comfort for which Harry was grateful. The pair walks together in silence until they reach the entrance to the Slytherin common room, where Zabini crisply speaks the password before Harry can recall it. Verisimilitude. When they enter the common room, Harry feels a palpable change in the atmosphere. The air is stiff and muted, even as other students have seated themselves in several small clusters to socialize or study. They feign disinterest well, but the shrewdness in their eyes gives their intent away. Harry remembers Loki's lessons about being attentive to context and recalls Zabini's artifice from the night before with this new perspective in mind. Understanding dawns on Harry. This is what Draco meant about garden gnomes. Regardless of what he's seen of his house today, a different game is played within the walls of Slytherin. Harry follows Zabini to a couple of chairs set at the far corner, past the entrance to their dormitory. When Zabini pulls out a book and starts reading, Harry's eyes sweep over the common room's occupants with new interest. He runs a thumb across the leather band wrapped around his left wrist in silent contemplation, feeling the shape of the runes pressed into the leather as he recalls the lessons of the one who gifted it to him. After a moment, Harry rummages through his book bag to find his charms textbook. He typically detests reading about theory, however, finding a clue to helping his friend is a different task entirely. Boring concepts become much more tangible with Draco's problem in mind. There's an urgency that focuses him as he familiarizes himself with basic charms theory. He's not too focused, however, to notice the movement in the common room. As more students enter, Harry glances up now and then, keeping track of where people are and what they are doing. He notes their formal interactions and quiet voices distantly. It's second nature for him to always know what's going on around him. If he didn't, then he wouldn't have been able to stay out of the way so well, or dodge the various objects that had been flung at him in anger. Harry's even developed a sort of instinct whenever aggressive intention is directed his way. It was a sort of prickling at the back of his neck that had allowed him to get a head start on escaping Dudley more than once. It also doesn't hurt that Zabini is offering bits of commentary on each person in the common room. Loki had said once, "In any game, one must learn the players as well as the rules." When the other boy first leans over to Harry giving insights into their classmates in a low voice that only the two of them can hear, he wonders what Zabini's price will be. After seeing the deal Zabini struck with Draco last night, Harry is acquainted with how much he values information. Obviously, Zabini's not giving him little insights into nearly everyone in their year simply to be helpful, unless he has his payment already. Harry doesn't have time to marvel that the epiphany in his head sounds strangely like Loki's voice, because he's pushing down the reflexive anger at being used for his notoriety. Of course, Zabini would benefit from gaining the appearance of someone who has the ear of the boy who lived. Harry takes a deep breath and weighs the information that Zabini has given. Much of it is probably common knowledge to anyone who grew up in wizarding society, but since Harry and Draco did not, it is of value to them. Harry's thoughts are interrupted when his familiar pokes her nose slowly out of his sleeve. She's hissing softly and asking for food. Harry smiles fondly as he pulls out the pouch he bought at the magical menagerie containing quail eggs charmed to stay fresh. It bore the label, Chittick's Creature Comestibles. He had asked about how it worked, and was amazed to hear the explanations of quail hens charmed to be comfortable laying as many eggs as chickens, wizards applying preservation charms, and the special goblin magic which would send eggs as well as other treats to customers far and wide. It was the same kind of magic that kept Draco's galleon pouch at a certain amount. Apparently, some enterprising wizards had contracted with the goblins to enchant their creature comestibles pouches in the same way. When Harry tells Yer that she can only have one, the background noise of conversation disappears. He tenses slightly, aware that his magical speech has drawn the attention of the entire room. Who would have predicted that the boy who lived would sort Slytherin? I wouldn't have believed it, but for hearing him speak Parseltongue, that is. Winfrith Selwyn, one of the 7th years sitting by the fireplace, is speaking too loudly for his words to be meant solely for the ears of his companions, Gordon Gibbon and Thorfinn Roll. He turns his head towards Harry and asks in an even louder voice than before, "But I wonder if Potter wouldn't have wanted to be in Gryffindor like his parents." It's obvious that everyone else in the room has stopped their own conversations in favor of listening to theirs. Harry wants to answer that he doesn't know anything about his parents, that he didn't even know anything about magic until the day Hagrid arrived with his Hogwarts letter. However, Loki had imparted many things to him during his time on the Odinson estate. One of Loki's lessons was not to give away information to just anyone. Often there is regret for saying too much, and seldom regret in too little said, he had explained to Harry. Still, this is a challenge that he cannot leave unanswered. Selwyn's true intent is plain enough to see he's testing Harry to see if he's a true Slytherin. Harry decides to respond with a trick Loki taught him. "You think I wanted to be in Gryffindor because my parents were in Gryffindor?" Harry asks with as little inflection as he can manage. This can only work if he keeps his tone neutral. "Well, I can't imagine why you'd want to be in the same house as the one who caused their deaths," Selwyn replies airily, likely seeking to provoke some kind of reaction from Harry. "You don't think that I want to be in Slytherin?" Harry asks flatly. "The child of Gryffindor Swintingto be in Slytherin, and the boy who lived, no less," Selwyn bursts out, as if it is the punchline to some great joke. He shakes his head and scoffs. "Merlin, no, that doesn't even make any sense." "Why doesn't it make any sense?" "It's a bit absurd that the symbol of the Dark Lord's defeat would sort into his house. Unless, of course, you had some ambition to." Selwyn stops abruptly, and his eyes narrow, evidently realizing that Harry has actually just been repeating Selwyn's own words back to him in the form of a question. "Well, aren't you interesting, Potter?" he says as he regards Harry with a calculating eye. The older boy drums his fingers against the couch, appearing to consider his response. "Maybe you are one of us after all," he concedes before he turns away, apparently dismissing Harry altogether. Zabini leans closer and whispers approvingly, "Well done, Potter." Harry rolls his eyes. Such smugness is motivated entirely by Zabini's own self-interest. "You must understand, it's not ever much of a surprise who gets sorted into Slytherin. But you and Odinson, no one is sure what to make of you two yet." "Right, and yet here you are, looking like the only one who has a clue," Harry whispers back. He turns his head towards Zabini and adds quietly, "Thanks for the information, But you know there's no reason we can't just be friends. Think about what Draco said last night. Without waiting for a response, Harry shrugs idly and goes back to reading his charms textbook. He finds himself rereading a passage several times about how all charms are a precisely balanced formula comprised of incantation, wand movement, and magical power. The casting of a charm must be exact, and even a slight mispronunciation of a word can sometimes lead to an unexpected result. Apparently, some poor wizard wound up with a buffalo on his chest because he said S instead of F. Many of Draco's early memories, the time when he had lived at Malfoy Manor, were filled with a feeling of never being good enough. Lucius didn't speak to him often, but when he did, it was often to remind Draco that he needed to be superior because Malfoys were always superior. The expectation was that he would exceed expectations, and the price of failure was rejection. Anything less than perfect was met with a scathing look of disappointment that Draco could recall with perfect clarity to this very day. That was the lesson he remembers most from the cold halls of Malfoy Manor, a certainty that was seared into his very bones despite all the years that had passed. It is why he feels like his heart is being crushed for his failure to perform a simple charm. The first time his magic wouldn't do what his father was trying to teach him, Draco had cried so hard he could barely breathe. He had been expecting the harsh reprimand that always came whenever he failed at a task, but his father had simply said, "Peace, little dragon. Everything in its time." And whenever he fell over and over again trying to reach the end of an obstacle course his father had laid, he received words of encouragement instead of condemnation. "Simply begin again, little dragon," his father had said whenever he failed at a task. But he didn't know how to begin again. He honestly didn't want to. After failing, again and again, Draco wanted more than anything to avoid the subject entirely. He had all but fled the defense classroom in a mild panic about Allspeak impeding his ability to cast charms. He just knew that he needed to get outside and clear his head as soon as possible. A simple run wouldn't be enough. He'd felt the need to hit something. Badly. Perhaps a tree trunk in lieu of a proper training post. But when he remembered that there were no suitable trees nearby, Draco decided instead to make his way to the owlery. "Come on, girl, let's go for a fly," he calls out to Hedwig before he shifts into a white hawk and zooms out the window. Draco had been able to do this a few times at the estate when Harry would be in the greenhouse and his father would say something like, "I think you should go practice your core curriculum for an hour while I show Harry how to properly prepare these ingredients." Harry naturally assumed that Draco had been sent off to practice some advanced archery or sword forms. And while Draco did, in fact, do those things, he'd also take to the skies with the snowy owl who he'd grown to adore. It's only after he's in the air that he remembers Father's prohibition against shifting forms while at Hogwarts. Undeterred from his present course of action, and mostly certain that what his father really meant was not to get caught doing it, Draco decides that he can shift back somewhere out of the way later. It feels far too good to be flying free in the sky. Hedwig flies swiftly up to him, and then Draco suddenly dives towards a cluster of trees before she can catch up. The rush of speeding towards the ground is incredible. He hears Hedwig's high-pitched whistle of disapproval behind him. She's fast enough to match his pace, but he's using his slight head start to his advantage. In addition, Draco's hawk form is smaller than Hedwig, so she's not able to follow in the same patterns through the tree branches. Still, she isn't too far behind him and is gaining ground. Her barking hoots of reproval are getting closer, and Draco wishes he could laugh in this form instead of just screeching his amusement. Faster, faster. The thought repeats again and again in his mind. His wings beat with the frustration he feels as he weaves in between the tree branches. Draco is moving so swiftly that avoiding the next obstacle takes up all the space in his thoughts. All that exists is the choice to move left or right or up or down. He makes his choices with each breath, even as his lungs start to burn, reveling in the satisfaction of feeling in control. When Draco shifts, He takes on the form, but not the essence of the animal he's imitating. His senses remain the same. He does not acquire any traits other than physical of the animal he's shifted into. It also requires a degree of magical concentration and coordination that he's still developing. Depending on the complexity of the form, Draco is able to hold his altered shape for minutes or hours. Typically, Draco can usually remain as a hawk for about an hour. With his turbulent thoughts and the excessive strain he's putting on himself, however, it doesn't take long for Draco's concentration to break. His sudden lack of wings does not translate into a cessation of momentum, and suddenly Draco is flying through the air towards a tree trunk with no way to avoid it. His shoulder slams against the tree and he tumbles down, grasping at branches only to have them break under his weight. Hedwig's squawks of distress are low and frantic. She sinks her talons into his shoulder and beats her wings furiously in a desperate attempt to help slow his fall. While Draco is thankful for the gesture, it is impossible for her to carry his weight and Hedwig's sharp clawshot. Seconds pass like minutes in slow motion as a new surge of adrenaline hits in response to his peril. When he's finally able to grab hold of a sturdy branch to cease his descent, Draco has just enough strength to swing his legs up to help pull himself over. Hedwig is now cooing softly in relief and nipping at his head. His lungs are greedy for air, and it takes a long moment before he is able to form words to reassure his familiar, "I'm all right, girl," he says in halting breaths. When his breathing evens out, Draco suddenly remembers something important. The cold realization is like ice in his veins. Stomach coiling with dread, he can only petition for mercy in his desperation. "Heimdall. Please, please, please don't tell my father about this," Draco yells in panic. "I'm unharmed, perfectly fine, see." He fervently hopes that the ever-watchful gatekeeper takes him at his word. As he begins to carefully climb down, Draco continues to talk to the one adult he knows will always listen to him. "I was just so angry about not being able to do a simple little charm today. Because of Allspeak. Heimdall, it's awful. Father's taught me all sorts of things about magic, but why didn't he teach me more about the magic of Midgard?" After climbing down to a more manageable height, with Hedwig flapping her wings and alternating between reassuring cooing and scold-hooting at him the whole time, he jumps down. Draco rolls smoothly through the grass to absorb the impact with practiced ease. His whole body is sore from overexerting himself, so he doesn't attempt to get up when he comes to a stop. Sprawled in the grass, gazing up at the sky, Draco's venting to Heimdall resumes. "And I don't think. I mean, Inno wouldn't send me here if I couldn't do the mortal's simple magic. Everything has a purpose with him. He's always making me have to figure things out." He groans and rubs his shoulder. All in all, he's bruised but generally uninjured. The shallow cuts on his hands from trying to keep himself from falling are already fading. Draco pokes his fingers through the holes that Hedwig made in his robes with a frown and decides to figure out how to mend his robes later. At least the wounds from Hedwig's claws are minor and should be fully healed by bedtime. If he'd been wearing his Asgardian leathers under the robes instead of the flimsy shirt and tie of Midgard, then he wouldn't have had any wounds at all. Draco silently curses the impracticality of Midgardian garments before he gives voice to the other thoughts which clamor for attention. "Heimdall, I've spent so much time learning so many things, and now I'm supposed to go to Hogwarts knowing nothing. Father is always telling me things without saying anything, and usually it's a game and it's fun. But this Allspeak keeping me from doing magic, it's important. Why send me here with such a disadvantage? Why even send me here at Aleph? I was going to fail." He finishes weakly. "I'm supposed to be better than this." Draco can't help but chastise himself, throwing his arm over his eyes when he feels the sting of tears starting to form in response to his overwhelming feelings. He wants to cry with frustration. He wants to scream with rage at his circumstances. He's been made to study dozens of subjects. Hogwarts, with its handful of subjects, wasn't supposed to be this difficult. Draco looked forward to getting a break from all the difficult studying his father has made him do each day. Yet, charms is supposed to be the easiest magical subject for first years. If he can't even perform a simple charm, Draco wonders how he is supposed to have any hope of doing anything at all. His thoughts spiral negatively until his stomach interrupts with an unhappy growl. Draco groans. He's going to be ravenous in the next hour due to all the energy he exerted. And I'm so hungry, Draco wails. Stupidly small Midgardian meals. Poor excuse of a feast. Ah! Draco suddenly finds his thoughts turning to the quirky house. Elf he'd known all his life, who had a penchant for wearing brightly colored t-shirts as tunics, and who would never fail to bring him snacks after training. The day his father took him home to the Odinson estate, Draco and Darby were introduced to the dozens of house elves who lived at the estate as the Husvitir. Unlike the house elves he had met before, the Husvitir didn't act like they were bonded in servitude. They simply acted as if they belonged. Darby had been in confused awe upon seeing the Husvitir's clothing and asked if they were free elves too. They, in turn, were puzzled at his question and replied that they were bonded with the magic of the estate freely. The Husvitir always genuinely happy to see Draco and his father whenever they'd return to the estate from Asgard. His father never ordered them about and never missed an opportunity to express his thanks for their care of the estate and its inhabitants. Draco learned that the Husvitir were magical beings who would care for magical places, and even some non-magical ones, should the mortals residing there be sufficiently gracious hosts. His father explained that many clans of the Husvitir had somehow become bonded with not only the magic of the households, but also with the magic of the wizarding families themselves. It was something that was unnecessary, as a family would always benefit from a Husvitir's care of a magical household. But unlike a household's needs, which were simple and static, the wants and needs of individuals were fickle and demanding. The Husvitir had been quietly horrified at Darby's compulsion to punish himself and how overly grateful he was at the smallest gesture of kindness. It was the most obvious consequence of the twisting of the natural bonding magic. Over the years, Darby became less self-effacing under the tutelage of the Husvitir. Draco sighs. Heimdall, I miss Darby. He had a fondness for all the Husvitir who let him follow them around the estate, showing him their various tasks like it was a sort of game, but Darby would always be his favorite. A loud crack of apparition startles Draco, and he cranes his neck searching for the source. Hello, young princeling, Darby's familiar voice rings out. Draco sits up fully and is greeted with the sight of Darby in his usual brightly colored attire. Darby, what are you doing here? Draco asks in shock. It is Darby's job to look after young Draco, the house elf says solemnly. The young princeling is at Hogwarts now, and Darby cannot be taking care of him if Darby is not also at Hogwarts. Darby did take the matter of his employment rather seriously. After being set free from the Malfoy family, Darby was paid 15 galleons a week to do many of the same tasks he had performed at the manor relating to Draco's care. Darby delighted in purchasing clothing with his earnings, socks in particular, in gaudy colors and dizzying patterns. Draco squints suspiciously. Father said for you to come to Hogwarts too. Sir Loki is not saying, but Darby is knowing what he is meaning. Darby must stay close to young Draco, he insists. Draco opens his mouth to respond, but then his stomach growls loudly. Young princeling is needing food. Darby looks appalled before his tone becomes exasperated. Why did he not tell Darby? Darby disapparates before Draco can reply and reappears a few moments later carrying a basket. Thank you so much, Darby. Oh, thank the Norns for you. Draco cheers in elation when he sees that the basket is filled with bread, cheese, and fruit. He grabs handfuls at a time and is glad his father is not around to scold him for eating like his Uncle Thor. Darby is so pleased to help young princeling. But Darby, it won't be the same. I'll be busy with my studies most of the time. Draco manages to say between mouthfuls of food. As much as he misses Darby, there really wouldn't be much for him to do at Hogwarts. His tasks concerning Draco didn't take much time, and he'd spend the majority of his days with the Husvitir. And won't you miss Baylor and the others at the estate? Baylor was the matriarch of the Husvitir clan that lived at the estate and tended to dote on Darby in a way that reminded Draco of his grandmother. The house elf's stubborn expression recedes as a wave of uncertainty flutters over his features. Draco seizes upon Darby's hesitation and adds, "What if you just visited me every now and then to look in on me? And your magic tells you when I call for you even if you're not here, right?" Darby nods slowly, finally relenting. Darby is a free house, elf, and he can obey anyone he likes, and Darby will do whatever young Draco wants him to do. It's settled then. I promise to call you whenever I need you. He stands up and checks the position of the setting sun. Draco estimates that there's more than an hour before dinner time. Just enough time to go to the library, he mutters, squinting into the horizon. Then Draco remembers that he dropped his book bag in the owlery before he transformed. His expression falls. "Except that I have to go back to the owlery to get my book bag. Darby will get it," the house elf proclaims before disapparating. When Darby returns with his things, Draco reassures the house elf that he has no more need of help. Darby points to the tears in Draco's robes and vows he will make sure they are mended during the night. Before he departs, the house elf admonishes him one final time. Young princeling is not knowing when he needs help. Darby will have to check on him every day to be making certain. Draco is unsure whether to be comforted or disquieted by that declaration. In the library, Draco is so engrossed in one of the more promising texts on charms theory that he crashes into someone. Pansy Parkinson. His mind supplies her name, and he recalls that she was sorted into Slytherin right after he was. But before Draco can even open his mouth to apologize and ask if she is all right, the girl takes a step back into a bookshelf with eyes wide and fearful. Draco knows he looks a bit disheveled after his tumble through the tree, but he didn't think it was so bad as to warrant being gawked at with such alarm. Just as he's scowling with disapproval at being treated so strangely by a fellow Slytherin, he remembers that this girl was the only Slytherin to react to Harry with fearful apprehension. Or at least, Draco had thought that she was reacting to Harry since he was speaking Parseltongue at the time. This response to him alone, however, contradicts his assumption and evokes his curiosity. "Gee, get away from me. I'll scream, I swear," her voice barely above a whisper. "You're afraid of me. I had assumed it was Harry," Draco remarks offhandedly, more to himself than to her. Tilting his head in thought, he wonders why she's acting so skittish towards him. Parkinson's face twists in offense. "Why would I be afraid of that half-blood?" Draco reassesses his position when Parkinson frowns at him like he's an imbecile. He mentally kicks himself for speaking without thinking through all the information he already has. Of course, there would be the likelihood that she would be a pureblood supremacist. He knew that many Slytherins had been raised with that ideology. With perfect hindsight, Draco concludes that he should have just catalogued her reaction and retreated to think through possibilities. His father's admonishments about speaking without thinking ring loudly in his thoughts. There was really nothing keeping him from doing that now except his wounded pride caused by miscalculation. After failing to cast a simple charm earlier in the day, Draco is particularly on edge about making mistakes. He rationalizes his next actions by the fact that he's already in a good position to get more information, so he smooths his befuddlement away and glares harshly while taking a step closer. Parkinson tries to back up even further into the corner, and the fear is back in her eyes. Does he ask a question? Does he make a statement? What he's trying to learn here? Stupid Draco, very stupid. He scolds himself, then turns and leaves. Parkinson's loud sigh of relief is audible even as he walks away. He's walking towards an alcove with 3 books in his arms when he's grabbed and yanked into one of the aisles. "Are you mad?" the larger figure demands. Draco recognizes her as another fellow first-year Slytherin, Millicent Bulstrode. "I honestly don't have much to be upset about," Draco snarks. "I'm quite happy, thank you. Your mother was a black, so a lot of the stories say that you went mad after you were kidnapped. I was never kidnapped." Draco hisses. Oh, so you simply decided to leave one day. At 6 years old, she challenges. I was even, he corrects firmly. Bulstrode snorts. No, you weren't. Your birthday wasn't for 2 more months. Draco almost wants to gape at the accuracy of that statement, but refuses to be played. Right, you've clearly studied up on me. Not hard to do. But that doesn't mean you can. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. She snaps at him angrily. For a moment, Draco can't process her words. It's the title of the book that. Where, Emmels? He exclaims in shock when he makes the connection. In Draco's memories, his first friend had been a boy because Mills did everything he did. At 6 years of age, Draco didn't actually know many girls, and the ones he did know had behaved in a way that was completely other. They didn't care to play outside because they'd get their fancy clothes dirty. Or so he thought until he went to go live with his father and heard his tales about Helga Hufflepuff and Aunt Sif. His world as a child was so small and narrow that it actually made sense that he didn't realize that Mills was a girl. But now, looking at the features of Bulstrode's face and the dark fringe parted in the middle that frames her strong jaw, it is obvious that she is indeed the same person who was his first friend. Don't call me that, she growls. I was friends with Draco Malfoy once, but then he disappeared. He's been missing for years, and Bulstrode pauses, her face contorting with anger before she spits out, with more virulence than Draco would have ever thought possible of the quiet child he knew long ago. I don't know you. Draco physically recoils, as if the words themselves had slapped him in the face. And stay away from Pansy, Bulstrode adds, as she pivots sharply before walking away. He stands there stunned and releases the breath he didn't realize he was holding. Chapter 15. When Harry arrives in the Great Hall, Draco is already situated in the far corner of the Slytherin table in what is becoming their usual spot. He's sitting with legs crossed and a large old book in his lap, scowling down at the pages. And somehow, in the few hours they've been apart, Draco has managed to look as if he spent the day battling gnomes. What have you found? Harry asks as he takes the seat at the end. Draco startles slightly, having been too absorbed in his study to notice Harry's arrival. It's not surprising that his approach went unnoticed. Draco can become remarkably preoccupied, and more than once, Harry's had to call Draco's name repeatedly before he'd even look up. At first, he'd been a bit hurt at being ignored before realizing that his friend genuinely couldn't hear him because he was so thoroughly engrossed and in a sort of reading trance. Harry still can't quite imagine what that must be like. Growing up with the Dursleys, failing to pay attention had always earned him bruises. Comparative study afterchums from around the world, Draco answers slowly, still distracted in the transition from his focused reading. Indigenous languages, different wand movements, cultural connotations. To Harry's amusement, he can see the exact moment when Draco comes back into the present after a handful of rapid blinks. He shuts the book, makes eye contact, and continues speaking at his usual speed. I think that means that intent matters much less in charms than it does in other kinds of magic. That makes sense. Harry nods in agreement. I was reading about a wizard who mispronounced a charm incantation, and Wizard Barruffio right. That story is hilarious, Draco laughs then sighs. His next words are cheerless. I think my options are either learn how to not speak Allspeak or to create new variations of charms based on Allspeak. Harry hums in thought and wonders if there's anything he can do to help. Draco's Allspeak ability is similar to Harry's Parseltongue. It just happens without any thought. He doesn't know how to speak it without looking at Yer, and wouldn't even know how to begin not speaking it while looking at her. Harry notices a twig in Draco's hair and pulls it out. So, Harry ventures, did you fall out of a tree, or? He means it to be a light-hearted jab, but Draco's brow furrows, and he runs a hand through his hair, self-consciously looking for more twigs. After a couple of passes, he grasps Harry's shoulder and exclaims in a voice filled with false fervor, I care not to dwell on such things. Harry's heard this odd tone from Draco before. The magic that made me an Odinson also killed my mother. Draco had confided this to Harry one early morning at the Odinson estate. Immediately following the revelation, Draco used this same too-loud voice to suggest they seek out glorious battle against the garden gnomes. His friend's usual bright smile is nearly as dimmed as it was that day. Understanding Draco's need for a change in subject, Harry entices Yer out of his sleeve by offering her an egg so he can look at her while he tells Draco about his experience in the common room, along with everything Zabini said about their classmates. As expected, Draco is sufficiently distracted. To Harry, the information seems random, but to Draco, it's another puzzle. When he's not able to solve one problem, Draco is happy to figure out another. Zabini arrives soon after the food appears on the table and takes the seat across from them. A dark owl that has been circling the hall swoops down and lands next to him, pecking at his fingers impatiently. He takes the note from the owl and frowns at it. "Stop it, farmer. I will write a reply to Mother presently." Zabini snaps as he pulls out a quill from his bag with a scowl and scribbles something before folding the paper up and holding it out for the owl, who takes it and flies away immediately. "Your owl is named for the Roman personification of gossip," Draco chuckles. "Oh, I get it. Rumor flies. Clever." Yes, yes, Farmer Volata and all that," Zabini says with his usual air of haughtiness. Draco rolls his eyes. "I just said that." Zabini ignores the comment and continues. "More importantly, ultra clercia farmer, sive barnum, sive malum farmer est." "True," Draco says at the same time that Harry asks, "What does that mean?" "To become famous in one way or another, whether it be good or bad, it is fame." Zabini translates, then adds, "Circe, Potter, your Latin is abysmal. You might as well give him something useful instead of whatever it was you were doing earlier." As Draco finishes his proposal, he makes a specific movement that draws Harry's eye. To anyone else, it would have looked like Draco was simply brushing something off his sleeve with the back of his hand. But Harry recognizes the gesture as one of the many hand signs he had learned during his time on the Odinson estate. Avoid. So Harry follows Draco's lead just as he did in the gnome battles and interjects before Zabini can respond. "I don't know. Latin doesn't seem very useful," even though he has an idea that Zabini's Latin lessons might actually be very useful to Draco finding a solution to his Allspeak problem. "And do you even know enough to properly teach anything, or do you just recite Latin sayings?" he adds. Zabini's offense at Harry's doubt in his abilities and the usefulness of learning Latin is immediate. His face looks as if he's just bitten into a lemon. Zabini forcefully insists that he will be teaching Harry Latin, whether he thinks it useful or not, because it is a disgrace for him to remain so ignorant about the language that serves as the basis for most spells, and how dare he accuse him of not being perfectly fluent in the language of his ancestors. Impressively, Zabini says all this to Harry in alternating Latin and English. Earlier in the day, Harry had thought Zabini was strangely easy to talk to, and is surprised that this ability seems to carry on even when another language is included. Zabini falls easily into conversation even as he speaks in both languages, somehow making the alternating sentences seem natural. The interspersed translations do not feel at all jarring. Harry picks up some Latin phrases and looks for opportunities to use them, sometimes earning a pleased hum or, more often, a correction in pronunciation. Zabini doesn't question that Draco only ever speaks in English despite understanding every word of Latin perfectly. Harry catches Draco tapping out another code on his plate with his spoon while Zabini continues his current rant. "Victory." Blaze narrows his eyes, but then quickly smooths out his expression. How quaint, he thinks to himself, as he observes the nonverbal signals Potter gives Odinson. While he can't understand their not-so-secret communication, it's easy for Blaze to discern that their hand movements are deliberate after years of being ruthlessly trained by his mother on how to move elegantly. Some of his worst punishments came whenever he failed to make graceful gestures look natural. Between the two of them, Odinson's signaling is less obvious and clearly more practiced than Potter's, so he must have been the one to teach it. It's curious because neither the lost heir nor the boy who lived has been seen publicly for years. It's also well established that the Odinson family is reclusive and impossible to contact. How did the two even meet? How and why are they so close? But then, everything about Odinson is so curious. There is so much about his fellow Slytherin that doesn't make sense, and the list of nonsensical things only continues to grow the more he observes him. Odinson displays no hint of trepidation in the face of Professor Snape's worst glares. And yet, he's seen Odinson look anxious whenever he sees Millicent Bulstrode of all people. Bulstrode is one of the least remarkable people of their year. It's the strangest thing to see Pansy's silent little shadow fearlessly giving glares of pure disdain to the lost heir, while Pansy looks terrified any time Odinson is in the same room. Blaise pays close attention during classes to gauge Odinson's magical ability. He isn't sure what's more mortifying, the fact that Odinson can't manage a single charm or the ridiculously exaggerated wand motions, which create a strange sense of house unity as everyone in the room cringes in second-hand embarrassment. But then, the very next day, Slytherin receives 25 points because Odinson manages a perfect transfiguration, wordlessly. After the initial shock, Blaise comes to the baffling realization that Odinson is somehow both incredibly brilliant at transfiguration while also being utterly hopeless at charms. He replays the scene in his mind and can't help but feel like there's something off with the way Odinson uses his wand, almost as if his wand movements are an afterthought. Incidentally, Odinson's wand itself is a curiosity. Blaise yearns to know where Odinson got his wand because it's clearly not Ollivander's work. He itches to get a closer look at it. From what he manages to see, the decorative metal inlay is the most complex he's ever seen on a wand. The wand is so strangely ornamental and yet looks so deadly. It matches his housemate well, since Odinson at times carries an air of danger himself. Blaise has gotten a similar feeling from some of Mother's hit wizard acquaintances. He's noticed Odinson slipping actual knives into secret pockets in his robes. And no matter what Odinson says, Blaise does not believe they are for cutting potions ingredients. And then, when Blaise expects Odinson's strange morning ritual of leaving before the sun rises, he wakes to Potter trying to wake Odinson, who is sleeping like the dead the morning after their midnight astronomy class. It takes both of them yelling and shaking their slumbering roommate for him to rouse. Odinson is so out of sorts that he walks out of their room wearing a tunic rather than a shirt and tie. At breakfast, Odinson is bleary-eyed and drinking a mysterious red-orange substance that appears to possess the viscosity of mud. He sighs with every sip as if it is ambrosia. When Odinson blows on the cooling drink, Blaise is even more revolted as the smell reaches him. At least the strange liquid doesn't seem to stain Odinson's mouth. Slytherin House's strangest first year does not need to look any stranger. If Darby starts making Ulfheim tea for me too, I can wake up with you for morning exercises, Potter exclaims excitedly. Blaise has never heard of Ulfheim tea, but it seems Potter has and is enthusiastic about drinking the mud drink. He internally pushes aside his objections and asks to try it sometime. His roommate's enthusiasm in response to this is quite gratifying. He thinks that not vomiting when he finally tries, it will have to be future Blaise's problem, and hopes it will be a worthwhile investment to gain some ground towards the alliance he is pursuing. Whenever Blaise tries to casually eavesdrop on his strange roommates, Odinson gives Blaise a suspicious look before pointing to Potter's snake, and then it's just Parseltongue and Odinson's vague responses. Blaise really wants to know why Odinson can even understand Potter's hissing, since Odinson is not a Parselmouth himself. To his utter frustration, while Odinson takes pains to obfuscate his conversations with Potter through Parselmouth and charades, he yet readily blurts out answers every time Blaise impatiently asks a question directly. But he can't simply ask about these things no matter what Odinson says. Trust is a commodity that must be earned or bargained for or stolen. Information and favor freely given are suspect, and it must be assumed that there is some hidden motive or some unknown price that will be demanded later. There is a method to the exchange that Blaze has known to be true for as long as he can remember. It starts with indirect inquiry and small trades of information as the pathways to gaining more trust. He is confident that the information he provided to Potter this afternoon has been enough to demonstrate his intent on forming an alliance. Still, he needs to keep looking for opportunities to show them how useful of an ally he can be to them. Blaze doesn't understand Odinson's insistence on friendship. It's baffling how they appear to have so much trust he and Potter have for each other when they seem to have only met just this summer. Each time they offer this easy friendship to Blaze with no additional condition other than acceptance, he's immediately on guard. It feels too much like a trap. It's a bit insulting that they'd think he'd be naive enough to fall for it. Honestly, Blaze isn't even sure what Odinson and Potter mean when they offer friendship. His earliest memory of such a thing was his mother telling him to stop associating with the one person he called friend because Blaze was picking up their bad habit of laughing too much. Such mannerisms were unattractive and made him appear common. From then on, Blaze stayed away from other children unless Mother gave her approval, and she only did that when she saw some benefit to their acquaintance. Mother had raised him to see everyone as either an enemy or a pawn. Never underestimate your enemies, and never give your allies undue trust, she had said. Yet, even while recalling Mother's words, Blaze knows he doesn't want to see Odinson that way, or Potter for that matter. After receiving a letter from her saying that Farmer would not leave without a response, he had no time to craft his words. Blaze wrote only a short sentence in reply, something he hopes cannot be twisted, misconstrued, and used against him. Maybe Odinson and Potter didn't have to be enemies or pawns. Perhaps not the vague idea of friendship they keep offering, but a real alliance of equals. Blaze only needs to discover what he can offer that is of value. Mutual benefit is the foundation upon which all good alliances are built. From the moment 5-year-old Millicent Bulstrode first met Draco Malfoy, she instantly liked him. Mills was an anxious child. She remembers getting disapproving looks and being ashamed that she didn't know what she had done wrong. When she tried to make friends with other children, they'd say one thing but mean another. She wouldn't understand. Hurt and confusion would fill her whenever she would walk up to a group, and then they'd suddenly stop talking and stare coldly. Worst of all were the whispers and giggles behind her back. Dirty half-blood. Yet, despite this, Draco Malfoy was kind. His bright presence was a beacon that drew her in even as she sought to withdraw from everyone. Mills didn't know how to act around others, but he didn't seem to care. He made her feel accepted in a place where all the other children ignored her. He told her that she was strong, and Mills knew it was true. Like an anchor in a sea of uncertainty, Draco was something solid to lean on when she couldn't trust anything else. And then, one day, he was suddenly gone. Draco's abduction had a profound impact on her life. When Mills was told that Draco was never coming back, the world became a frightening place where calamity was certain. That was when she started trying to anticipate and plan for what to do when things would inevitably go wrong. She slept very little for weeks as she stayed up late every night, thinking about such things as how to escape a kidnapper or where to hide if an intruder broke into her home. She asked her parents the names of every person they trusted to pick her up in their place, so she would never be at risk of being taken by a stranger who pretended to know them. She even begged her mother to take her to the DMLE so that she could ask them what to do if someone was after her. It is a habit that continues even now. Throughout the day, her mind works through worst-case scenarios, and she comes up with plans to minimize risks that she might possibly encounter. The first thing Mills did after boarding the Hogwarts Express was to ask an attendant what the procedures were in the event of an emergency. Her first question to Professor Snape was whether there was any safety manual for brewing potions. Her friendship with Pansy in the aftermath of Draco's disappearance was surprising. Though the other girl had initially resented Mills for her close friendship with the Malfoy heir, their mutual grief bonded them as they processed his loss as best as they could. Pansy appreciated Mills' steady presence and the way she would silently listen to Pansy's rants without judgment. Mills liked that Pansy was so open with emotions and could so easily express in words what Mills could not. In time, they convinced each other that they had to move on and accept that he was gone. Looking back, Mills thinks that Draco Malfoy's light would have inevitably been smothered by the rigid rules of pureblood society. A small part of her wonders if it is actually a good thing that the bright boy she knew is frozen in time and perpetually unchanged in her memories. Ironically, it is that same quality of brightness that Mills was drawn to as a child which now repels her. Odinson's radiance is nearly blinding. She tells herself that her disdain is due to its indecorum and not because it reminds her so very much of her lost friend. It's not proof he's still the same person. It's proof that he doesn't belong. Never in all her most ridiculous worst-case scenario daydreams had she ever imagined Draco Odinson. From the moment 12-year-old Millicent Bulstrode saw Draco Odinson, she knew she hated him. Everything about Odinson is an insult to the memory of the boy she knew. After spending years grieving the loss of her friend, this laughing idiot wearing his face appears. He doesn't belong. His brightness shirts and the feeling of familiarity absolutely repulses her. Mills physically recoils from any resemblance of Odinson to the person who lives in her memory, the same way as one would from smelling curdled milk. It's different from Painie's reactions. For Pansy, Mills knows that seeing Draco Odinson is like coming face to face with the monsters her parents told her would come if she wasn't a good little witch. If you aren't careful, you'll be stolen away just as the lost heir was. You remember him, don't you? Poor little Draco Malfoy. He disobeyed his father, so he was taken away by a mad wizard and then went mad himself. You don't want to wind up mad, do you? They used to tell them. She thinks now that the Parkinsons never really believed that and simply wanted to use Draco's abduction to frighten Pansy into behaving. It probably worked a little too well, and Odinson must seem to Pansy as her childhood nightmares brought to life. Mills knows just how terrified Pansy is of Odinson. That's why, despite not wanting to have anything to do with Odinson, Mills was compelled to confront him after seeing him purposefully scare Pansy in the library. It had felt so satisfying to hurl those words, "I don't know you," at the impostor. And what nerve of him to look so pathetic when he was the one who wasn't right. Nothing about him was right. What gall to claim to know her. The miserable look on his face when she told him to stay away inflamed her rage at his very existence. Professor Binns, Odinson's voice startles a good number of people who had settled into naps. He did this during their first class earlier in the week to the same results their history of magic professor continues on with his lecture as if he cannot hear the cries for his attention. Mills has never seen ghosts before coming to Hogwarts, but she's heard that they can be completely oblivious to the living. SHHHHH. Several of their classmates admonish Odinson, many of whom have been startled out of their sleep. Professor Binns, Odinson calls out again, waving his hand around much like that annoying Gryffindor girl during their first potions class. When their ghostly professor does not respond to the increasingly irritating attempts, Odinson stands up and walks towards the front of the classroom. There are several gasps and at least one person telling Odinson to sit back down. He ignores them all and starts searching around the podium. Professor Binns continues to drone on about something. No one was paying attention to him before Odinson got up, and they are definitely not paying attention now. "Draco, what are you doing?" Potter asks frantically, looking embarrassed. As well he should. Odinson is a disgrace to all Slytherins. Searching for the interface control, Odinson sounds exasperated, as if what he is doing is perfectly reasonable. "What are you talking about?" "Draco, just come sit back down, please," Potter pleads. But he's not answering any questions, so obviously the interface isn't calibrated or he suddenly trails off as Professor Binns passes through him. "Oh," Odinson pauses thoughtfully before saying, "he's a ghost," as if this is somehow new information. The entire classroom groans at his inane statement. "Of course he is," someone yells, and more than one person asks if Odinson is blind or mental. Mills despairs for the dignity of her house. There's a dull thump behind her which sounds like it could very well be Potter's head hitting his desk. "Well, that's," Odinson mumbles and then nods his head decisively. "I see." He then reaches up to stick his fingers through the professor's face. Mills isn't the only one who gasps in shock. "Professor Binns, I have questions," Odinson nearly shouts, and there is a golden flash of magic. The apparition blinks and then focuses on Odinson, now looking at him. The text doesn't really go into the details, and I don't think there's context for understanding the importance of this event, Odinson says, before he launches into a series of questions. Do gargoyles serve architectural functions other than helping direct water away from buildings? If that was their only function, then couldn't charms replace them? What was their leverage? What made it a wildcat strike? Is there a gargoyle union? What concessions did they want? To everyone's amazement, Professor Binns actually answers. And then their ghostly professor gives Slytherin 20 points for Odinson's insightful questions. It's a very strange turn of events. Mills catches some of the conversation between Potter and Odinson outside the classroom later. She's irritated that he interrupted the class, but still wants to know what Odinson did to their history of magic professor. All she could cobble together from Odinson's convoluted comments was that something called an face was something common in his grandparents' library, and that it was like a painting, but also like a book, and it looked like a ghost. A quick glance at others exiting the room confirms that no one else seems to understand Odinson's explanation either. Mills feels a headache coming on trying to figure out what he did and why he did it, but then she reminds herself she doesn't care and that she's not interested at all. Mills makes eye contact with Odinson for a moment, and his eyes seem to plead with her. She keeps walking. The days of perpetual summer on Asgard are about 10 hours longer than on Midgard, where the typical day on Midgard has about 5 to 10 hours of sunlight, depending on where you are. Asgard has more than twice that many. The nights on Asgard are far shorter than Midgard's, and Aesir typically only sleep the equivalent of about 5 Midgardian hours. A childhood spent between the realms of Midgard and Asgard has given Draco great adaptability when it comes to getting sleep when he needs to. Mostly. Due to Draco's Midgardian biology, his father had always insisted on a minimum amount of sleep, because such things are necessary for one growing up on two realms with different day lengths. As a result, Draco is conditioned to wake up after 7 hours of sleep, regardless of what time he falls asleep. Even during the weeks when there were feasts in Asgard, Draco would still sleep for his minimum 7 hours, even if it meant missing games and contests held in the mornings. Thus, Draco awakes the morning after their very late astronomy class to Harry shaking him and saying breakfast starts in 10 minutes. He's confused for a moment to be waking up in a place that isn't Asgard or the estate on Midgard, before remembering that he is finally at Hogwarts. He realizes that it's much later than he usually wakes, and less than 7 hours since he went to bed at nearly 2 a.m. "Why didn't anyone wake me?" he laments loudly. "I tried," Harry calls out as he comes out of the bathroom. "Nothing worked. I've never actually seen you sleep in. Are you all right?" "Breakfast is only on for another hour." "I need tea," Draco groans, "and not the tea they have here. Darby, please save me." Darby appears with a pop and reassures Draco that he'll make sure his favorite tea will be waiting for him with his breakfast. Draco is so glad that Darby has decided to stick around Hogwarts. Earlier this week, Draco found his newly mended robes folded neatly at the foot of his bed. To his delight, he found that Darby also added means of holding knives along the inside. It's been Draco's habit to try and keep as many knives on him as possible until he can conjure them like his father. Now that he is required to wear his Hogwarts robes practically all the time, he'd taken to placing them in his boots, the wand holster he wore on his left forearm, and the arm bracer that he wore on his right forearm. Darby has also been placing snacks in his school bag each morning. "Thank you, Darby," Draco says softly in gratitude just before Darby disappears. He doesn't even bother with the hassle of Midgardian buttons and simply throws on a tunic instead of the buttoned shirt and tie. There is no time for exotic indulgences as he's running late for the first meal of the day. One day, he'll try wearing the trousers of Midgard, but so far he hasn't wanted to sacrifice the comfort and ease of Asgardian leathers. Harry yawns. "Darby's here at Hogwarts. That's brilliant. Maybe I should have asked for some tea too. Alfheim tea is your favorite, right? That red, goopy stuff that tastes a bit like spicy cinnamon chocolate," Harry asks with interest. He had initially looked at the tea with great suspicion the first time it was served with breakfast during his stay at the Odinson estate, but eventually grew to enjoy it. There really isn't any drink like it on Midgard. It looks like red mud, but flows like mercury. Best of all, it's delicious and invigorating. "Yes," Draco hisses in eager anticipation for his favorite morning drink and leaps out of bed. "I cannot wait." Thank the Norns for Darby. He cheers it as one of the few good things that have happened because his first week at Hogwarts is not going at all as he expected. So far, he has an ally he doesn't entirely trust. Allspeak is interfering with his casting, and his first friend hates him. He remembers Mill's anger, the way she looked at me as she said. Draco promptly cuts off those uncomfortable thoughts. There's enough for him to worry about, like making it in time to eat breakfast, and he decides he'll just ignore that problem altogether for now. Good things, focus on the good things, Draco tells himself. He feels a step closer towards figuring out how to cast with Allspeak. When he'd heard Zabini speaking in Latin and English, Draco could hear that the words were the same, but also that they sounded different somehow. It felt different. Like hearing the same song in a different key maybe. And then later, he tried to speak to Harry later in Latin instead of Allspeak, and it was like searching for an elusive word that was on the tip of your tongue. Suggesting Latin lessons for Harry was a way to hear more without revealing Allspeak to Zabini. Draco also knew that the only way to get his housemate to agree to something was to strike some kind of bargain. It reminds him of how his father described dealing with the dwarves of Nidavellir, who only respected the language of trade. Thankfully, his Allspeak problem doesn't extend to all subjects. The Norns must have some pity on him. Where he is abysmal in charms, he is prodigious in transfiguration. Allspeak is not preventing him from transfiguration. Or rather, he discovered that his ability to perform transfiguration without speaking, quite by accident, really. He was concentrating so much on holding the incantation in his mind that he didn't notice the moment his matchstick became a needle. Unfortunately, the same trick of wordless casting does not work for charms. He knows how to weave Sather and shift forms. He knows a fair bit about rune magic and how to enchant objects, even if he's never done it before. He's even learned the foundational concepts behind the elemental magic of the Light Elves and the way that mortals outside wizarding society draw on dimensional energies to perform their sorcery. And yet a simple charm is impossible for him. Good things. What else happened that was good? Draco tells himself again before he can go any further along with those thoughts. He thinks of how he was able to fix Professor Binns and how history of magic is going to be so much more interesting with a professor that will actually answer questions. Draco was so surprised that an actual ghost was teaching a class. Naturally occurring magical psychic imprints are too unpredictable to be used that way. It would have made more sense to have a wizarding painting teaching a class. Wizarding paintings were invented as a sort of mimicry of the ghost phenomenon to preserve knowledge and experience, but with the certainty of knowing what memories the painting will retain. Clearly, wizarding portraits were a more reliable source of information than a ghost. Upon being asked why he's not wearing a tie with concern about his questionable clothing choices costing them points at breakfast, Draco reminds his nagging housemates that only plain black work robes are required under the school regulations, and he could wear whatever he wanted under them. Thank you very much. Also, protective gloves are only needed for certain classes, winter cloaks are only needed outside, and hardly anyone ever wears the pointy hat. The day drags on. Though the Elfheim tea this morning helped, Draco never feels ready for learning anything until he's had a morning run. Classes last longer than usual today, too. They're usually over by 3:30 p.m., but today it's flying lessons after what is normally the last class of the day. And though Draco loved being in the air and enjoyed watching skyball matches whenever his father would take him to one, he's never really thought much about using a broom for flight. Not when he knew the feeling of soaring on the wind, while transformed as a bird, or the thrill of holding onto his Uncle Thor's shoulders while flying through the skies of Asgard. As the entire class hovers in place at Madame Hooch's instruction, Draco irritably thinks that a broom really doesn't compare. Draco is already cranky due to missing half of breakfast after staying up late for astronomy class the night before. He didn't really mind the class, it just caused them all to go to bed much later than usual. He's been feeling off balance the whole day from having missed his typical morning routine. That being the case, it's a surprise that his body reacts instinctively at the sight of Longbottom about to fall. Without even thinking, Draco instantly flies up towards him just as the Gryffindor tips over. He is just in time to intercept the falling boy, grabbing him by the back of his robes. Draco quickly pulls the hapless Gryffindor over to his own broomstick and brings them both back to the ground safely. "Good heavens!" Madame Hooch exclaims. Draco scans the awestruck faces of the other students and belatedly wonders if he shouldn't have made his rescue look so effortless. He blames his sleep deprivation for only just now realizing that Longbottom is a bit larger than he is, and he should have made more of a show of hoisting the Gryffindor up instead of doing it so easily. With only one hand, oops, Draco thinks sheepishly, maybe they didn't notice. Why you saved me? Longbottom cries with eyes wide in disbelief. I can't believe you saved me. Thank you, of course, Draco replies easily. I couldn't let you fall. He's not expecting such an outpouring of gratitude over such a simple act. Their flying instructor rushes over and looks over Longbottom. Broken wrist, she mutters. Come on, boy, it's all right, up you get. She assesses Draco's condition next and grasps his right shoulder. He intentionally winces and makes a face as if he's in pain even though it feels fine. Not dislocated. You're lucky, she concludes, and then turns to the rest of the students. None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave those brooms where they are or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come on, dear. As Madame Hooch walks off with crying Longbottom, something in the grass catches Draco's eye. He walks over and picks the object up. Suddenly, an irritating voice assaults his ears. Hey! What do you think you're doing stealing Neville's Remember-All? Draco doesn't need to look to know it's Weasley. Thinking back to their exchange on the train, he resolves not to answer the rude ginger on principle. Hey, give it here, Odinson! Weasley yells and starts to stomp over to him. Harry is at Draco's side instantly, while the other Slytherins on the field are on alert and moving to flank the approaching Gryffindor as he continues his bluster. You slimy git. His grandmum gave that to him. And Draco just can't help it. He smiles meanly. Well, in that case, he says with a shrug and puts the Remembrall in his pocket. The shade of red the Weasley turns is just as gratifying as he thought it would be. His fellow Slytherins snicker. Harry tilts his head in question. But since there's no simple way to non-verbally communicate, I hate the weasel, and I'm not going to give him the satisfaction of giving this to him. He makes a few quick gestures. Enemy in sight, regroup. Harry nods in acknowledgement. Move along, Weasley, Zabini sneers. The Gryffindor looks around and realizes that he is surrounded by Slytherins, with none of his housemates coming to help him. "This isn't over," Weasley declares before angrily rejoining the group of Gryffindors. Later, at dinner, Draco stands up and walks over to the other side of the hall towards the Gryffindor table. The Hufflepuffs look alarmed as he passes them, and the Ravenclaws merely look curious as usual. In the short time it takes him to cross the hall, half the student body seems to be whispering to each other. Longbottom is on the side closest to his approach with his back turned, and the Weasel is sitting on the opposite side, eyebrows rising in fury the closer Draco gets. Whoever is sitting next to Longbottom shakes him and says, "The Slytherin that took your Remembrall is here," prompting Longbottom to turn around just as Draco arrives. Draco clears his throat and says, "Excuse me, Longbottom." Longbottom's eyes are wide and fearful. "Why, yes," the other boy stutters. "Norns, what has the Weasel said about me now?" Draco wonders. There are several scandalized gasps when he reaches into his pocket to pull out the Remembrall. Draco can only conclude they thought he was pulling his wand. Yes, the evil Slytherin walked all the way over here, slowly and deliberately, with all these witnesses to hex a Gryffindor in plain sight of all the professors. And the headmaster, Draco thinks incredulously. Draco rolls his eyes, pulls out the Remembrall, and offers it to Longbottom. "It's a present from your grandmother, right?" "I wouldn't want to lose anything my grandmother gave me." After a moment of confusion, Longbottom's nervous face clears, and the look of hero worship from this afternoon is back. "Oh, thank you," he exclaims, and gets up to take the Remembrall. "Wait, why didn't you give it to Ron earlier when he asked for it?" a bushy-haired Gryffindor girl asks. "Maybe because I didn't trust a thoughtless liar to handle something that was obviously precious," Draco scoffs without stopping to turn around. "Or maybe it's all part of your plan to humiliate our little Ronikins," one of the ginger-haired twins calls out. Draco laughs out loud at that accusation. "Oh, I don't need to do anything to accomplish that, as he seems quite adept at doing it himself." He thinks to himself and decides not to say that out loud. Upon his return to the Slytherin table, several of his housemates are looking at him as if waiting for an explanation. Harry is smiling with approval. Zabini looks calculating before he grins and slaps Draco on the back, saying, "Good show." Something about that seems to put the rest of his housemates at ease, and the odd moment of tension passes. After dinner, he spends time with Harry and Zabini in a corner of the common room playing each other at wizard chess. Draco knows that half a dozen of their housemates are likely listening into their conversation, but it's been a very long day, and he can't really bring himself to care much. "So, Odinson, why Hogwarts and not Durmstrang?" Zabini asks casually. "A long, long, long time ago, a son of Odin befriended the founders of Hogwarts, and they pledged that any child of his family would always be welcome here." He responds cheerfully without thinking, as one of his pieces destroys one of Harry's. At Zabini's look of skepticism, Draco immediately realizes that he has misstepped by giving information without asking for something in return. He's not used to this dance, this give and take, and so he's fumbling clumsily through it. It reminds Draco somewhat of what he's been taught about how the dwarves of Nidavellir highly respect the language of trade and the exchange of things with equal value. Whatever else Zabini might be, Draco thinks that the other boy is probably a good exemplar of the typical Slytherin and useful as a sort of Slytherin barometer. Pureblood family, which has historically been sorted into Slytherin, interested in things they perceive will give them an advantage, values the things that they perceive will benefit themselves, and unapologetic in doing what they believe will achieve their ends. All boxes that most Slytherins share in common. Not that Draco believes that people can actually be fit into boxes. At the end of the day, they're still just boxes. As his father says, no matter how many boxes you have, they're still not people-shaped enough. Are the rumors about your ancestors being revered as Norse deities true? My mother's family line can be traced back to ancient Rome, but there's no definitive proof that we are in fact descended from the witch who inspired the myth of Aphrodite. Draco hesitates and recognizes Zabini has offered information while also asking for information. He takes a moment to consider how to answer the question. While he could just say yes, Zabini wouldn't take that at face value. Draco settles on saying, "It's true that my family has ties to the Norse pantheon, but I don't know how you definitively prove something like that." Zabini hums thoughtfully and seems satisfied with that answer. Draco adds, "Your family background explains your owl's name at least. Your middle name isn't Hercules or something equally pretentious, is it?" Zabini looks surprised, then smug. "Oh, as if your own father isn't named after a Norse deity. I'd expect you've an uncle Odin somewhere." "I've an uncle Thor," Draco says flatly. Blaze laughs and looks pleased whether it's that his guess was right, or that he was able to get additional information out of Draco. He can't tell. "My full name is Blasius Carluccio Zabini. A good name is the best of all treasures." Zabini turns to Harry and says, "A good name is the best of all treasures." Draco can hear the difference between the way the two phrases sound, but he still can't grasp how they are different. Harry repeats both like a dutiful student of the language, giving Draco another opportunity to try and understand. "Hey, Draco," Harry says after his next move with a grin, "does Heimdall have a beard?" "Yes, he does." He responds automatically. Relived no games are necessary with his best friend. "I thought so. I've been hearing people say Merlin's beard. But if I'm going to swear by a beard, I think it should be a good one. And Norse Vikings probably have great beardspeter than Merlin even." Rich laughter bubbles up at the idea of swearing by Heimdall's beard. "Without a doubt, Harry. Though Odin's beard is probably the most magnificent. He is the king of Asgard, you know." "I bet he's got the greatest beard of all," Harry exclaims with exaggerated awe. Zabini coughs and puts a hand over his mouth, likely to cover up a laugh, and says with mock offense, "I dare say that Zeus would offer some competition." "You'd swear by Zeus's beard?" Draco inquires with genuine curiosity. "Circe, no," Zabini gasps and puts a hand to his chest dramatically. "My mother would faint to hear her son would be capable of such crudeness." And then they are all laughing just genuine laughter, the way friends should laugh together. Draco wonders if they'll ever move past quid pro quos and be true friends with Zabini. He hopes so. His game with Harry drags on longer than the last ones. At 9:30, Zabini gets up stating his intention to head to bed. Before he leaves, he makes a point to remind Draco and Harry that he gets to play the winner in the next one regardless of when that will actually happen. Just as Zabini is almost to the stairs leading to the dormitories, Nart intercepts him. "Your desperation to form an allegiance is even more pathetic than Crabbe and Goyle's clumsy attempts at following me around," their housemate hisses in Zabini's ear. No doubt the comment was only meant for Zabini to hear, but Draco can't help but catch it anyway due to his better-than-mortal hearing. "And when you try to turn them against each other, they'll both abandon you like the trash you are." The weedy boy pushes his roommate roughly and walks away. Draco wonders at the hostility in Nart's voice. It sounded very personal. He'll have to puzzle that out later. The rest of the week goes on, and there are no additional complications with Allspeak interfering with his casting to Draco's relief. Before he knows it, it's the end of the final class for that week. He gets paired up with a Ravenclaw during Transfiguration and is so caught up in a debate about Skyball versus Quidditch that he almost forgets to wave his wand after he completes a Transfiguration with little effort. Draco has just started to explain fantasy Skyball when Harry comes over to remind him about tea with Hagrid. "Sorry, I've got to go, but we could talk more tomorrow," Draco offers when the Ravenclaw asks him to explain how points work in fantasy Skyball as he gathers his things. The Ravenclaw frowns. "I'm planning on spending all day studying in my common room, but all right, that's perfect. I'll see you tomorrow afternoon," Draco says with a smile and a wave before running off with Harry so they aren't late to meet Hagrid. He doesn't notice Ravenclaw's confused look as he leaves. He also does not notice that another Ravenclaw is looking absolutely horrified at their exchange of words. Wait, he didn't mean, Padma Patil says with a strained voice before she turns and hits her fellow Ravenclaw in the arm. Michael Corner, did you just invite a snake to our common room? Chapter 16. Harry's heart is pounding. He successfully answered Professor Snape's questions on the first day of class and is now about to complete his first potions assignment at Hogwarts. Harry didn't usually care about the approval of authority figures, having been let down by them so often in the past, but Loki had shown him that adults could be competent and trusted. So Harry wanted to trust Professor Snape, and he wanted to learn about potions from him. He still felt guilty about somehow annoying his head of house during their introduction, and felt that this would be the best way to redeem himself. He would prove himself to the potions master, no matter what. They were to make the simplest form of the antidote to common poisons by mixing together mundu, puffapod spores, and flabberworm mucus. Harry knew that there were other, more complex recipes for this potion using rarer ingredients like boomslang skin or unicorn horn powder. It made sense that first years wouldn't be able to handle those kinds of ingredients yet. Even though the ingredients he was working with weren't very exciting, something Draco was murmuring complaints about Bathory put all his effort into brewing his potion. The puffapod spores were the key. The book hadn't given any instructions on how exactly to prepare them for the potion. But Harry remembered reading about this ingredient. Like so many others, he had committed to studying the month before the school term started. He knew from his lessons with Loki before term started that grinding them up would decrease the potency of an already weak potion, and dropping them in whole wouldn't ensure that they would dissolve fully. He concluded that they needed to be sliced just right so that they'd thoroughly dissolve and infuse properly into the mundu base. Draco was starting to pound a puffapod spore like many of their classmates, so Harry stopped him. He showed his friend how to slice them while the mundu began to heat in their cauldron. To Harry's satisfaction, the sliced spores fizzled and dissolved when they were thrown into the simmering liquid. Noting the consistency of the liquid, he added half the flabberworm mucus called for in his textbook, checked the viscosity again, and then added just a small dollop more. Since Harry had read that the mucus was used as a thickening agent, he was mostly sure that it didn't matter if he added it in little by little rather than all at once. He turned off the heating flame and reread the final instructions. After performing the final stirring movements and waving his wand over his cauldron, Harry was rewarded by the sight of his potion turning the exact shade of dark, iridescent turquoise described in the textbook. He breathes in awe at his shimmering creation. My first potion, Harry thinks with glee. He looks at Draco and grins widely. Mr. Potter, Mr. Odinson. Professor Snape's voice came from behind them before the man leaned in to examine the potion. Passable. Draco frowned and folded his arms defensively, but said nothing. Harry was simply relieved. Passable was enough for him. Passable meant he wasn't useless, as the whisper of his mind insisted as he awaited Professor Snape's assessment. Passable meant he did something right. He smiled brightly at his professor. There was a flicker of something on Professor Snape's face before the man turned away, black robes whirling behind him in dramatic fashion. By the end of class, Harry's relief became pride as Professor Snape judged everyone else's potions even more poorly, with his comments being either unacceptable or abysmal. Professor Snape did not dismiss the class before assigning a foot on puffapod spores, which Harry was confident he could write easily. Potions class was everything he had been hoping for and more. He finally has the confidence to approach Professor Snape after class with questions he'd been wanting to ask since the summer. Professor Snape, would you have time for some questions, sir? You have 5 minutes, Mr. Potter. Well, I was wondering, sir, about the different ingredients listed out in magical drafts and potions versus the Book of Potions. That is, for the cure for Boyle's Potion Budge's book has ingredients that Jigger's book doesn't. How much difference do the pungus onions, powdered ginger root, and pickled shrake spines make? Other than the shrake spines, The additional ingredients seem like they wouldn't really add any magical component, would they? So, do they make the potion stronger somehow? I mean, is a potion better because it's simpler to brew, or is a potion better because it's more powerful? Professor Snape arched an eyebrow. Mr. Potter, this is not a 5-minute conversation. I'm sorry, sir. Harry deflated. You may come to my office an hour before dinner to discuss your questions. Oh, thank you, sir. I'll be there. Hope blooms in Harry's chest. His potions professor is making time for him. He wants to answer Harry's questions. Loki had reassured him that he could always ask questions and that he wouldn't be treated like a nuisance, but he still felt so anxious asking them. The common room has emptied, leaving Draco and Harry as the last ones by the dying fire. The green-tinged light from the lake casts strange shadows across Harry's face as he yawns. Harry, Draco begins, his voice hushed despite their solitude. This is going to sound strange, but my father had me learning all sorts of things growing up. He especially liked teaching me about different meanings for things. It was like a game we played. He'd say something which could mean another thing, and I'd have to sort it out. It was like how he had us do riddles after dinner when you were staying with us. Draco is rambling and uncertain. He knows it sounds strange given how much confidence he usually exudes. Just like that time on the train when people asked about his childhood, the hesitancy doesn't suit him at all. Okay, Harry says lightly, clearly hoping to help with whatever is bothering Draco. So it's just this thing I do without really thinking about it, Draco continues quickly. And, Harry, Draco takes a deep breath. Your mother's name was Lily, wasn't it? Harry suddenly sits up straighter on the couch. What? He sounds almost dizzy with how unexpected the question is. Draco, what has this to do with my mother's name? Well, asphodel is a type of lily. I think it means something to do with regret in Victorian flower language. And wormhood is something like sadness or bitterness. Draco hesitates a moment before continuing, his grey eyes meeting Harry's green ones. When Snape asked you his first question, all those things popped into my head. It was like he was saying he was sad about a lily. Do you think that he knew your mother? Harry is speechless. He hadn't considered that he could talk to someone who knew his parents. Hagrid seemed to know of them, but that wasn't the same as someone who actually knew them. Someone who would give him answers about his parents beyond they were heroes. Draco must see Harry's hope because he says quietly, I'm sorry, it could just be a coincidence. Maybe, it can't hurt to ask. Harry lays back on the couch, but his eyes are distant, clearly contemplating. After a moment he speaks again. He might have known your mother too, Draco's breath catches. What? Your mother was from an old pureblood family, right? And more purebloods get sorted into Slytherin than any other house. Maybe they went to school at the same time. Maybe, Draco echoes, his voice soft. It can't hurt to ask. They sit in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the windows. Draco thinks about Narcissa's mother he never knew, who died giving birth to him. He wonders what she was like, if Snape might have stories about her. Eventually, Harry yawns again and heads up to bed. Draco follows soon after, but sleep doesn't come easily. He lies in his four-poster bed, the green hangings casting familiar shadows, and stares at the ceiling. It's been almost a week, he thinks, the ache of it settling in his chest. It had been a week since he'd last spoken to his father. It was the longest they'd ever gone without contact since Loki had taken him away from Malfoy Manor. Even when Loki had been called away to other realms on Allfather's business, he would always appear in Draco's dreams to check on him. But the dreams this past week had been just dreams. Normal, unremarkable dreams that faded upon waking. No visits from his father. No reassuring presence guiding him through the dreamscape. He'll come, Draco tells himself firmly. He always comes. He thinks about the week that's passed. The disaster with charms, and the discovery that Allspeak was interfering with his incantations. The triumph in transfiguration, where wordless casting came naturally. Saving Longbottom during flying lessons, when the boy's broom went haywire an act that had earned him suspicious looks from his Slytherin housemates, who couldn't understand why he would help a Gryffindor. And tea with Hagrid yesterday, where Harry had spotted a newspaper article about a break-in at Gringotts. Draco had immediately recognized the name Nicholas Flamel when Hagrid accidentally let it slip. Of course, he knew about the creator of the Philosopher's Stone had read about the alchemist in one of his history books years ago, which meant the Sorcerer's Stone is at Hogwarts. Draco has so much to tell his father, and so much he needs advice about. He turns over in bed and squeezes his eyes shut, willing himself to sleep, willing the dreamscape to open and let his father in. Please, he thinks as sleep finally begins to pull him under. Please come tonight. Loki focuses on traversing and projecting his presence across the realms and into Draco's dream. The dreamscape is easier to find than expected his little dragons, longing acting as a beacon that pulls Loki through the dimensional currents with unusual ease. When the swirling mists of the space between realms part, Loki finds himself standing in a familiar place, the training grounds of the Odinson estate, bathed in warm afternoon light that doesn't quite feel real. Draco stands in the middle of the field, his back to Loki, practicing forms with a practiced sword. The movements are good precise and disciplined, but there's a tension in his little dragon's shoulders that speaks of frustration rather than focus. Hello, little dragon. Draco whirls around, and the joy that breaks across his face is brighter than any sun. Father! In an instant, the practiced sword is forgotten on the ground, and Draco is running toward him. Loki opens his arms just in time to catch his son, the impact of the embrace solid despite the ephemeral nature of dreams. In this space between waking and sleep, touch is possible but muted, like feeling through silk rather than skin. You came! Draco's voice is muffled against Loki's chest. I kept waiting, but you didn't come. Forgive me. Loki tightens his embrace, feeling a pang of guilt at the obvious relief in Draco's voice. The time flows differently between the realms. What has been almost a week for you has been less than a day for me. I came as soon as I realized how much time had passed. Draco pulls back, grey eyes shining. Only a day, truly, truly. Heimdall informed me this evening that nearly a week had passed in Midgard. I was most distressed to learn I had left you so long without counsel. Loki reaches out to squeeze the back of Draco's neck, Thor's gesture of reassurance that Loki had adopted as his own. Now, tell me everything. I would hear all about your first week at this place of learning. And so Draco does. The words spill out of him like water from a broken dam about Charm's class, and the mortifying discovery that Allspeak was translating incantations into their meanings, rather than letting him hear the Latin, about transfiguration and the unexpected success of wordless casting, about flying lessons and the Longbottom boys' near fall. I caught him before he hit the ground, Draco says, and there's a defiant edge to his voice. Some of my housemates gave me strange looks, as if helping someone was somehow against the rules of Slytherin. You did well, Loki assures him. A warrior's first instinct should be to protect, not to calculate advantage. Draco's posture relaxes at the approval. He goes on to describe making friends with a Ravenclaw. I invited myself to their common room tomorrow to tell him more about Skyball, and the ongoing Latin lessons with Zabini, and tea with Hagrid where they discovered. The Sorcerer's Stone is at Hogwarts, father. Draco's eyes are bright with the excitement of puzzle solving. Hagrid let slip the name Nicholas Flamel, and I know that's the alchemist who created the stone. And there was a break-in at Gringotts the same day Harry and I were there. The vault that was broken into must have been where they were keeping it before they moved it to Hogwarts. Loki's eyes narrow slightly. The Sorcerer's Stone, hidden at a school full of children. The old headmaster's judgment was even more questionable than Loki had thought. You have done well to piece that together, Loki says carefully, but promise me you will not go seeking it out. Whatever protections Dumbledore has placed around it, they are not meant for students to test. I know, Draco says, though there's a gleam in his eye that Loki doesn't entirely trust. I will visit soon, Loki promises, but there are matters I must attend to in Asgard first. Your Uncle Thor's coronation approaches, and there are preparations to be made. The truth is more complicated, of course. The truth is that Loki has grave concerns about Thor becoming king when his brother still thinks with his fists rather than his head. The truth is that war would surely follow Thor's ascension, and war would mean Draco being called to fight Draco, who is still so young, but would be sent to the battlefield if he comes of age while Asgard is at war. These are not burdens for his little dragon to bear. I miss grandmother and Uncle Thor, Draco admits. And Aunt Sif, do you think she'll teach me more sword forms over winter break? I am certain she would be honored to. Loki feels the edges of the dream beginning to fray morning approaching in Midgard, pulling Draco toward waking. We will spend time in Asgard during your winter holiday, little dragon. But for now, focus on your studies. Work on the Allspeak problemy suspect. If you can learn to hear the distinction between languages, you may be able to overcome it. I'll try, Draco promises. Then more softly, will you come again soon? Of course. Loki pulls his son into one last embrace as the dreamscape begins to dissolve around them. Be well, little dragon. Remember whose you are. I will, Fathia. And then the dream releases its hold, and Loki finds himself back in his chambers in Asgard, the weight of many concerns settling back onto his shoulders. Loki makes his way to the Bifrost in the early hours, when the only light in the sky comes from the eternal stars that wheel overhead. Heimdall stands, as he always does, a golden sentinel at the edge of everything, seeing all that transpires in the 9 realms. You visited the littlest prince, Heimdall says without turning. It is not a question. I did. Loki comes to stand beside the gatekeeper, looking out into the endless dark. Thank you for alerting me to the time differential. I had not realized so many days had passed for him. There is a pause unusual for Heimdall, who typically responds immediately. Then, he speaks to me often, you know, your son. Loki finds himself surprised. Does he? He calls out to me whenever something exciting happens. There is the ghost of a smile in Heimdall's voice. He has told me about his first feast at the school, about the games of chess he plays with his friend, about the strangeness of sleeping under a lake. He was most indignant about the quality of the food compared to Asgardian fare. Loki laughs despite himself. Of course, Draco would complain about the food. And the other one, Harry Potter. Ah, now there is definite amusement in Heimdall's tone. The Potter boy has taken to swearing by my beard. Your beard. Apparently, he decided that if he was going to invoke someone's beard, it should be a worthy one. He asked Prince Draco if I had a beard, and when told that I did, declared that he would swear by Heimdall's beard, rather than this Merlin figure the other wizards seem to favor. Loki cannot help the genuine laugh that escapes him. The image of earnest young Harry Potter invoking Heimdall's beard every time something astonishes him is utterly delightful. I do hope that is not considered an offense. On the contrary, Heimdall turns slightly, his golden eyes meeting Loki's. It pleases me. That child has seen much darkness in his young life, yet still finds wonder in the world. That is worthy of respect. They stand in silence for a moment, watching the stars. Then Heimdall speaks again. The coronation approaches, and just like that, the warmth of the moment evaporates. Loki's jaw tightens. It does. You have concerns. Loki does not answer. Heimdall sees all he does not need Loki to confirm what he already knows. Thor loves battle too much without understanding the consequences of war. As king, all of Asgard would be dragged along into the first conflict Thor could find. The older warriors who longed to die gloriously would only encourage this recklessness, and war could go on for years. Draco was not far from reaching the age where he'd be expected to fight. Loki turns away, his green cloak swirling in the ever-present wind of the Rainbow Bridge. I am merely concerned, as any brother should be. Heimdall does not respond, but Loki can feel those all-seeing eyes on his back as he walks away. Sif finds Loki in the gardens, which is unusual. The second prince typically haunts the library or his private chambers when he is not being tasked with diplomatic missions by the Allfather. To find him here, among Frigga's roses, suggests either deep contemplation or a desire to avoid his usual haunts. "You've been keeping to yourself these past few days," she says by way of greeting, settling onto the stone bench beside him. "More than usual, I mean." Loki doesn't startle to be surprised if he had, given his uncanny ability to sense approaching presences, but something flickers across his face before his customary neutral expression settles back into place. "Have I?" I hadn't noticed. It's such an obvious deflection that Sif almost laughs. Almost, because she has noticed something else, something that's been bothering her since Draco left for his Midgardian school. "Loki." She waits until he turns to look at her, those green eyes revealing nothing. "How are you faring, truly?" A pause. Then, with a razor-thin smile, "And why would the fierce Lady Sif concern herself with my well-being?" "Because you've changed since Draco came into your life," she says bluntly. Subtlety has never been her strength, and she sees no reason to pretend otherwise. "You've been different, more present, less," she searches for the right word. "Less like you're constantly calculating the angles." Something shifts in Loki's expression, a crack in the mask, quickly patched. "And you preferred the old Loki." "I didn't say that," Sif frowns. "I'm saying that without Draco here, you've gone back to being your old self, and I'm asking why." The silence stretches. Sif watches the play of shadows across Loki's face as the afternoon light filters through the leaves overhead. Since Draco's introduction to Asgard, he'd been dropping some of the mask he usually wore. She felt like she was finally getting to him. But now, with Draco gone, the mask was firmly back in place, and Sif finds she doesn't like it. "You don't have to tell me," she says finally, rising from the bench. "But remember that some of us see more than you give us credit for." She's halfway to the garden gate when Loki's voice stops her. "Sif," she turns. "When Draco speaks of Asgard, he speaks of you often. He wishes to learn the sword from you because he says you're better than Fandral." Despite everything, Sif feels warmth bloom in her chest. That brave, strange boy who had demanded to call her Aunt Sif the first time they met. "I look forward to teaching him more forms when he returns to Asgard." Loki nods, and for just a moment, the mask slips enough for her to see the father underneath, one who loves his son fiercely and fears for his safety in equal measure. Then the moment passes, and Loki is Loki again, unreadable and calculating. Sif leaves the garden with unease settling in her gut. She's known Loki since adolescence, and it's exhausting trying to decipher his indirect way of saying things without ever saying anything at all. She has never fully trusted him, not after what he did to her hair, not after countless schemes and tricks over the centuries. And yet, watching him with Draco these past years, she had begun to wonder if perhaps there was more to the god of mischief than she had ever given him credit for. Now, with that calculating gleam back in his eye and Thor's coronation looming, she's not so sure. Savannah Zabini stares at the letter a moment before folding it up and applying her seal. After several drafts, she has finally achieved a satisfactory, tone-appropriately formal, while making an overture for a more informal familiarity in the future. "My lord, Jarl Odinson, I write in most sincere and grateful joy at the news of our respective heirs establishing a friendship at Hogwarts. With my most dutiful gratitude for your family's abundant kindness, I have made bold to present your honourable lordship with an invitation for tea at my London abode in that same spirit of friendship. If you should honour me with an acceptance thereto, I will, of course, await a decision on the date and time of your most gracious convenience. For all comfort and all satisfaction is sincerely wished you by your most humble servant. With hopes to have the pleasure of being, dear Jarl, most affectionately yours, Viscontessa Savannah Nicoluccia de Zabini di Napoli." Though all her sources insisted it was impossible to send correspondence to the Odinson, Estaterumours placed it somewhere in magical Britain. But its exact location remained a closely guarded secret. Savannah had secured a method for ensuring that the letter was delivered. It hadn't been too difficult finding an assistant to a high-ranking official of the magical Ulthingi, of the Scandinavian Wizarding Union who were susceptible to bribery. While they couldn't disclose the secret of getting an owl past the Odinson wards, the deputy speaker's assistant had agreed to send Savana's invitation, along with some official correspondence. Now, all she needed was to receive confirmation from her son that he was successful in establishing a friendship with the lost heir. Blaze's terse reply note was far less detailed than she'd have liked, saying simply, "Dear Mother Ralliance has been secured with details in negotiation." Biting her lip in annoyance, Savannah thinks about how she needs to know more. The Odinson family was practically wizarding royalty, and her plans to obtain the prize of Loki Odinson did not include him having any heir. Savannah had never considered beguiling someone with a child, but this situation was unique. Surely, what was done could be undone, and perhaps even redone with her darling boy instead. Savannah rose from her writing desk and crossed to the mirror that dominated one wall of her study. It was an old thing, framed in gilt that had been in the family for generations. She gazed at her reflection at the dark hair cascading over one shoulder, at the features that she'd been told since childhood bore a striking resemblance to the ancient family statue of her ancestor. Never speak or sing while in front of a mirror, the Zabini family doctrines whispered in the back of her mind. A compilation of strictly detailed rules about how they were to use their secret legacy rules she had spent countless hours memorizing before her ceremonial recitation on her 16th birthday. Rules meant to protect the members of their family from drawing too much attention. Beguile no one in the direct line of succession of a family, members of minor branches only, approach no one favored by the heir to a noble family. No more than 3 marriages, separated by a period of no shorter than 7 years. Savannah smiled at her reflection. Her family's ambitions were too small. They were descended from a powerful witch worshipped in ancient times as an incarnation of the goddess Aphrodite. Cyanum's Scopuli, name of their inheritance, named for the 3 islands where the sirens of myth made their home. The tongue of a siren. The heart's blood of a Vila, the eyes of a Zana. It only made sense that the family doctrines shouldn't apply to her. There was no reason to live in fear and hide her resplendent presence from the world. After all, what kind of mother would she be if she didn't seize such a marvelous opportunity?